We have traveled through the turbulent waters of our own minds. We have learned to identify the places where we try to control what is fundamentally beyond our reach, the unpredictable crowd, the whims of fortune, the actions of other people. It is easy in the rush of modern life to mistake sheer exertion for wisdom, to believe that if we simply work harder, plan better, or argue more convincingly, we will somehow trap happiness or safety within a fixed set of circumstances. But true freedom, perhaps paradoxically, requires us to surrender our grip on outcomes. It is not about inaction. It is about understanding the precise limits of our influence. The core struggle of human life is often defined by this tension, the desire for ultimate security versus the constant reality of change. We crave permanence in a world built upon flux. We build walls of expectation and rigid plans around ourselves, hoping to keep out the necessary disruption that growth demands. Yet, every wall we raise ultimately reflects something within us, a fear, perhaps, or an unacknowledged vulnerability. And all things born of fear are inherently fragile. The path toward resilience requires a radical shift in where we place our attention. We must move our gaze away from the distant goals and future achievements that endlessly promise satisfaction, and ground it instead in the quiet act of being right now. Consider the nature of attachment itself. When we become deeply attached, whether to an idea, a person, or even our own perceived successes, we are essentially constructing emotional stakes around transient phenomena. And when those things inevitably change, or when they fail to meet the perfect expectation we built for them, the resulting pain is not merely disappointment, it is structural grief. This grief tells us that we have confused what truly belongs to us with what we simply value highly. The external world, the accolades, the possessions, even deep relationships in their ideal form, these are loaned to us by circumstance, and they will be returned eventually. They do not belong irrevocably to our core self. What remains then? What is the immutable ground beneath the ceaseless motion of life? It is the inner landscape, the faculty of judgment, the capacity for conscious choice, and the quality of our attention in this present moment. These are the only resources that cannot be taken from us by external chaos or misfortune. To practice freedom is to accept that we have mastery over how we interpret an event, even if we do not have mastery over the event itself. The blow lands regardless of preparation. It is our immediate judgment, the story we tell ourselves about the blow, that determines whether it breaks us entirely or merely leaves us bruised and wiser. The weight that ancient philosophy hands to us is this: your peace of mind is not a dividend paid by external conditions. It is a skill set, built moment by careful moment. It is cultivated in the pause between stimulus and response. This practice demands relentless self-observation. We must become the quiet, impartial witness to our own thoughts. When panic rises, when judgment lashes out, when desire blinds us to reality, we do not judge the thought itself, we simply label it. There is a fear of scarcity. There is an urge toward validation. This gentle separation creates vital distance between who you are and what you feel. The goal is not emotional numbness. It is emotional clarity. It is seeing the raw data of reality without immediately coloring it with the rich, often catastrophic pigments of personal narrative. We learn that accepting things as they are does not mean we surrender our capacity to improve them. Rather, it means first fully acknowledging their current state, their reality, before deciding how responsibly and effectively we will respond to that truth. This is observation without resistance. It is the quiet power found in simply seeing. This journey toward a life of wisdom is therefore less about monumental achievements or profound revelations, and more about an almost surgical attention to the mundane seconds. It is choosing patience when your instinct screams for immediate reaction. It is offering compassion to yourself when you fall short of idealized standards. It is recognizing the deep connection between voluntary detachment and genuine joy. The paradox whispers that by letting go of everything we believe we need to control, we are actually allowing ourselves to acquire something infinitely more valuable: unconditional inner sovereignty. A freedom rooted not in perfect external conditions, but in unshakable internal resolve. This realization allows us finally to revisit the words offered to us at the beginning, those ancient words that carry such a profound weight. Now, understood through this lens of choice, acceptance, and detachment, their meaning resonates with crystalline clarity. They are no longer cryptic pronouncements. They are detailed instruction manuals for navigating the messy, beautiful business of being human. We spent time examining the external world. We looked at traffic, at glowing screens, at the frantic rush of modern life. In our eagerness to manage everything that moved around us, the unpredictable currents of other people's emotions, the whim of fortune, the timing of an event we longed for, we became entangled in a profound and weary deception. We mistook effort for control and exhaustion for achievement. The human mind, naturally, is wired toward prediction, to smoothing out the jagged edges of uncertainty. It seeks order where only randomness exists, peace where only flux endures. But what if this desire itself is the source of our greatest suffering? What if the struggle against reality is the true enemy, not reality itself? Consider the nature of control. We think we are masters of our circumstances because we can plan our day, we can budget our resources, and we can argue for a better outcome. Yet, when external forces, a sudden illness, an unpredictable economy, or simply the sheer unpredictability of another soul's heart, disrupt that meticulous plan, we feel not just inconvenience, but profound helplessness. We rage against fate. We mourn what was lost to chance. This feeling is exhausting because it implies a fundamental misunderstanding, that our power extends beyond the borders of our own minds. The Stoics observed this tension long ago, and their insight remains startlingly relevant today. They understood that much of the anxiety we carry is predicated upon hypothetical disasters. What if I fail? What if they judge me? What if things never go right? These questions are invitations to premature suffering. We spend our limited mental energy preparing for futures that may never arrive, and lamenting pasts that can no longer be altered. This temporal scatter of worry is what diminishes us. It prevents the deep, calm settling into the sufficiency of the present moment. The true work of philosophy begins here, drawing a rigid line in the sand between what is up to us and what remains outside our dominion. What truly belongs to us? Not our health, for that can slip away. Not our reputation, which others have final say over. Not our possessions, which time inevitably claims. No, what is fundamentally ours, uniquely our own, is the space of internal judgment itself. It is the filter through which all external events must pass before they touch us. This realization is not merely intellectual. It demands a monumental behavioral shift. We must treat our judgments as highly valuable resources, guarded from every casual anxiety and unnecessary assumption. An event, by its very nature, is neutral. A sudden failure at work, for example, or the criticism of a dear friend, these are simply sensory data points delivered to us by the world. It is how we narrate these events that determines their power over our inner peace. If we meet them with self-recrimination and panic, they feel like catastrophes. But if we observe them with detached curiosity, as mere occurrences, they lose their sting. This required detachment is not indifference, It is a far more active state of vigilance. It means recognizing that while we cannot dictate the winds or predict the tide, we can absolutely choose the strength and firmness of our own sails. We can adjust our internal bearing regardless of how chaotic the external scene becomes. This ability to self-regulate judgment in the face of chaos is what they called virtue. It is a radical freedom. Imagine your mind as a fortress under constant siege. The arrows flying at you are worry, regret, and anxiety, all directed at things that do not belong within the walls. Your duty is not to block every arrow physically, for that is impossible. Instead, your task is to train yourself to recognize their source of power. They only wound when you accept their target as true. The path away from the illusion of control begins with a profound acceptance of limits. Accepting that some things simply will not be ours, a specific person's love, success measured by another's standards, perfect health until our natural end. This surrender is counterintuitive, almost painful at first, because it requires us to abandon comforting illusions of omnipotence. But within that abandonment lies the kernel of true liberty. The pause button moment we sought is not a literal switch to turn on or off. It is the cultivated space between stimulus and response. It is the instant where panic has not yet solidified into action, where anger has not yet solidified into words. In that gap, that silent pocket of time, rests our entire agency. This gap is sacred, for it allows us to insert reason between emotion and consequence. To train in this pause means practicing self-observation. It means watching a thought arise, perhaps a sharp burst of frustration at a perceived injustice, and simply saying, I am having the thought that I was wronged. Separating the identity from the passing mental event is the first great act of mental self-ownership. We are not our thoughts. We are merely the consciousness observing them. This profound understanding redirects all energy. Instead of expending ourselves trying to lasso fate or mold difficult people, we turn that effort inward. We focus on refining the quality of our own inner landscape. This is where true mastery resides, in the quiet, unwavering habit of being justly minded, regardless of how wildly the surrounding world may behave. The goal is therefore not a perfectly controlled life, but a deeply resilient soul. A soul that understands the difference between what happens to us and how we choose to process what has happened. It is recognizing the weight of our own inner judgment, that this single faculty is the only truly sovereign territory we possess. To guard it fiercely, gently, constantly, in every moment that unfolds before us. We have spent time considering the external world, the tides of fate, the sudden shifts of fortune, the unpredictable actions of others. We learn to gently pull back from the illusion of control, realizing that much of what causes us pain exists beyond our physical grasp. But true philosophical work does not simply manage distance. It requires a deep internal investigation. It demands that we turn inward, moving past the noise of circumstance and into the quiet landscape of the mind itself. If external events are forces we must learn to accept, then what about the events happening inside? The human mind is an active place. It does not merely observe reality, it constantly judges it. And often, these internal judgments become sources of our deepest suffering. We find ourselves in a dialogue with unseen voices, a relentless conversation that rarely feels kind or comforting. This is where we meet the inner critic. Think of this voice as an echo chamber built entirely within your own consciousness. It speaks constantly, weaving narratives of inadequacy, of future failures, and of past mistakes. This voice does not speak truth, it speaks patterns. It dictates that you are insufficient, that you must perform perfectly to be worthy, or that others will always disappoint you. The inner critic operates under a seductive authority. It is loud, persistent, and wrapped in the guise of protection. We believe it helps us, that by constantly warning us of potential dangers, we are actually keeping us safe. Yet its grip is crippling. It paralyzes action with preemptive doubt, making even simple choices feel like monumental risks. The ancient philosophers understood that our suffering rarely comes from what happens to us. Rather, it comes from the stories we tell ourselves about what happened. The inner critic is simply the masterful storyteller of our personal drama. Its narratives are built on fear and expectation, creating a constant state of internal war. To confront this voice requires more than mere acknowledgement. It demands meticulous separation. We must learn to distinguish between a thought and the truth itself. A thought is merely electrical activity in the brain. It is data passing through. It has no inherent moral weight or objective reality simply because we heard it, or because we accepted it as fact. Consider this critical moment. When you experience doubt about your competence, the inner critic immediately flares up, reminding you of every time you have failed before. Instead of reacting to the feeling of inadequacy, the emotional tsunami, we must intercept the thought itself. We must recognize its function. It is a pattern repeating itself, not an immediate declaration of your reality. The goal here is not suppression. We cannot simply silence this voice overnight. The mind is too powerful, too accustomed to self-flagellation. The aim is instead calibration, to change our relationship with the sound it makes. This process begins by developing radical objective distance. When that wave of critical thought washes over you, the whisper telling you that you are not enough, we pause and name it. We say internally, there is the judgment pattern regarding failure. This simple act strips the voice of its mystery and its power. It reveals what it to be a mere habit of mind. The inner critic thrives on our entanglement with its premise. If we believe that the thought, I am inadequate, is an absolute fact about our soul, then we must live accordingly, with fear, hesitation, and constant striving for external validation. But when we treat it as just a loud thought, a narrative fragment, we gain immediate freedom. We are saying, yes, I hear you. You have been very persistent. But this is a suggestion, not a law of nature. It is an opinion passing through the gate of my awareness. This shift in perspective fundamentally changes our self-dialogue. Instead of arguing with the content of the criticism, telling ourselves, no, I am perfect, we simply observe the process itself. We become witnesses to the mind's turmoil, much like a calm observer watching a storm pass through an unfamiliar landscape. The practice is rigorous and compassionate simultaneously. It requires us to acknowledge the protective function that this critical voice thinks it serves, while simultaneously undermining its authority. We must thank the part of us that is worried, but gently redirect its energy towards self-compassion and realistic assessment. We are retraining a deeply ingrained psychological mechanism. For years, we have accepted the inner critic's harsh pronouncements as our authentic voice, as our deepest truth. Now, we learn to separate who I am from what my mind suggests. Our core self is not defined by its worst self-judgment. It is defined by the moments of conscious pause, those rare, precious seconds where we choose observation over reaction. This internal battle is perhaps the hardest struggle of all, because the opponent wears our own face. But understanding that even these seemingly unbreakable patterns are just habits, just echoes that can be replaced by more truthful statements of acceptance and reality, is where true resilience takes root. Mastery, ultimately, does not come from proving ourselves correct to a relentless inner jury. It comes from granting ourselves the profound grace of self-acceptance, moment by gentle moment, thought by passing thought. By meeting the critic with steady curiosity rather than defensive anger, we finally begin to dismantle its power and build an architecture for a mind that is truly at peace. We have journeyed far from the initial question. We started by confronting the heavy weight of an ancient quote, a passage that seemed distant and difficult to grasp. We examined the siren call of control, realizing how much energy we waste trying to manage futures, others' choices, or uncontrollable fortune. We learned that true power never resided in our external circumstances. Instead, it was always rooted within, in the subtle space between a trigger and our reaction. The deepest struggle often occurs not with outside forces, but within ourselves. Our minds are relentless places. They build elaborate narratives around events, assigning meaning and weight to every passing thought. We become trapped in the judgment that interprets mere mental noise as irrefutable truth. This inner critic is a harsh companion, whispering doubts of inadequacy or predicting disaster before it even occurs. The suffering we feel is rarely caused by what happens to us. Rather, it is born from our interpretation of what happened. The initial work was therefore one of separation. We needed to create distance between the observer and the observed, to see a critical thought not as fact, but merely as an electrical pattern passing through the brain, a temporary data point. This recognition allowed us to strip the inner critic of its authority. By naming the patterns of our thoughts, we began the slow process of self-acceptance, acknowledging the complexity of the mind without sacrificing one's sense of self. As we proceeded, we were introduced to the profound value of pausing. To pause is not to stop moving. It is to intentionally halt the automatic cascade of stimulus and response that defines much of human emotion. It is to step back from the immediate emotional current, the flash of anger at a perceived slight, or the sharp pang of anxiety over an impending failure. This space we create through conscious pausing becomes our greatest resource. In this pause resides freedom. The concept of resilience, therefore, emerges not as an ability to withstand force, but as a radical capacity for non-reaction. It is learning that you are not your immediate emotional state. You are the consciousness that observes the emotion rising and passing away. This requires immense vigilance, a continuous attention paid not just to what we say, but to how we interpret every fleeting image or sound. We then had to define our borders of responsibility. What is truly ours? Our possessions, our reputation, even our relationships. These are all subject to change and external will. Only three things remain consistently within the dominion of our will: our judgment, our intent, and our inner choice in the face of adversity. This realization radically reorients one's focus. It forces a pivot from worrying about what we cannot change, toward mastering the few elements that define who we fundamentally are. The path to wisdom necessitates the discipline of acceptance. This is often misunderstood as passive surrender, a resignation to fate. But genuine Stoic acceptance is far more active and powerful than mere passivity. It is profound observation, acknowledging reality precisely for what it is in this moment, stripping away the layers of what ifs or it should be. Acceptance does not mean that difficulty does not exist. Rather, it means facing difficulty with unshakable acknowledgement and choosing how to meet it. This understanding of acceptance guides us toward recognizing consequence. Every thought we entertain, every judgment we hold, is not contained within the confines of our skull. It ripples outward. A single moment of unfair judgment toward another person can swell into a prolonged misunderstanding that damages a relationship or poisons an atmosphere for days to come. Thoughts are therefore revealed as powerful forces, capable of expanding far beyond the self. If we truly accept the law of ripple effect, then our primary ethical focus must be on controlling the source, the initial judgment within us. To cultivate internal calm is not merely a personal therapeutic exercise. It becomes a civic responsibility. It requires that we guard our minds as fiercely as we guard our physical bodies. The ultimate lesson leads us to the paradox of attachment. We cling so tightly to success, to comfort, to specific people remaining always the same, that this very clinging becomes the source of profound pain. The attachment blinds us to what is real and necessary. Wisdom shows us that freedom is gained through detachment, not detachment from life itself, but detachment from outcomes. Detaching from the need for things to be a certain way allows one to experience flow, to navigate change with grace, recognizing that permanence belongs only to processes, not things. This cumulative journey, from scrutinizing the limits of control, to observing mental patterns, to practicing deliberate pausing, and finally accepting what cannot be changed, leads us back, inevitably and powerfully, to the original ancient quote. The quotation is no longer a riddle or a philosophical exercise. It has become a blueprint for daily existence. The core message resonates with startling clarity. That true mastery of life involves radically redefining where we place our effort. It demands that we stop spending precious energy attempting impossible external edits, trying to force others' hearts, or commanding the unpredictable tides of luck. Instead, all power is rediscovered in the deliberate moment of internal choice. The wisdom required by this ancient statement is not found in a single burst of insight. It is built meticulously, day after day. It is visible in the quiet act of journaling negative thoughts to gain objective distance from them. It is apparent in the calm response when faced with sudden conflict. It manifests in the commitment to simply show up and observe the moment without judgment. To live wisely means understanding that attention itself is a choice, a continuous, conscious decision to anchor oneself in the present reality, regardless of how difficult or uncomfortable that reality may be. The journey does not conclude with a grand pronouncement, but with a gentle challenge. Wisdom, we learn, is not a destination you arrive at. It is the quality of your attention as you move through this moment, right now. It is the subtle muscle of pausing before you speak, the steady hand that chooses acceptance over resistance, and the quiet heart that understands its own boundaries, the beautiful limits of what is truly within our power to command. We have spent time considering what lies outside our direct command. We looked at the inevitable chaos of the world, the unexpected sickness, the unpredictable shifts in fortune, the actions of other people. It is a comforting human impulse to believe that if we simply try hard enough or plan meticulously enough, we can somehow manage every outcome. We want external stability because it feels like safety, but life consistently reminds us that much of what surrounds us operates outside our sphere of influence. Consider your possessions, for example. They are gifts, sometimes necessary, but inherently temporary. They crumble, they break, or they simply pass out of your grasp. Your reputation, too, is built on the shifting sands of other people's opinions. These external validations feel vital to our sense of worth, yet we know them to be wholly unreliable scaffolding for a life well lived. If our deep sense of self-worth, our inner peace, is anchored to things that are not permanent and cannot be controlled by us, then that sense of worth is subject to constant, exhausting emotional turbulence. The core lesson we must absorb here is an act of radical reassessment. We must learn where the borders of our true power lie. Our hands, our voice, our efforts, These things can affect others, certainly, but they cannot control how those others will judge us, nor can they command external events to unfold according to a perfect script. What remains? What are the only realms of existence that truly belong entirely to you? It is not your physical body. It is not your bank account. It is not even your immediate memories or your past mistakes. The things that remain exclusively within your domain are two profound faculties: your ability to judge and your choice of intent. The judgment is the process by which you interpret an incoming fact. A harsh word, a sudden setback, a disappointment, these are neutral data points in themselves. They merely happen. But it is your internal dialogue, the story you build around that event, that assigns it its emotional weight and its meaning for you. Do you judge this failure as proof of your incompetence? Or do you judge it simply as a temporary obstacle to be navigated? The second interpretation strips the first one entirely of its power. The choice, in turn, is the deliberate response rooted in your core values, even when fear or anger urges a different path. It is the moment where you intervene between the stimulus and the reaction. This intervention requires immense mental effort. It means treating your mind not as a servant that must simply obey emotion, but as an observer, a disciplined watchman watching the drama unfold. To understand this separation, to truly grasp what is yours, is to fundamentally change how you approach suffering itself. We often assume that suffering comes from bad things happening, but history of philosophy teaches us something more nuanced. We suffer not when things happen, but when we resist accepting what has happened to be true in the present moment. The pain is always proportional to the gap between reality and expectation. If we accept reality as it is, if we acknowledge that this specific challenge at this precise hour cannot be undone by our sheer wishing, we don't become passive bystanders. Rather, we gain a powerful kind of resilience. We cease wasting precious mental energy fighting against the fundamental laws of existence. This acceptance is not resignation. It is clear-eyed observation. It is recognizing the map for what it is, only a representation, never the territory itself. The profound weight of this realization is that freedom begins with radical ownership of your internal life. Everything external, the traffic jam, the critical boss, the economic downturn, is merely raw data projected onto you by the world. Your power lies in determining which stories you choose to tell yourselves about that data. You can choose to view it as a catastrophe, confirming all your deepest anxieties, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity for practice and chance to strengthen the muscles of judgment and choice. The challenge is immense because our emotional biology is wired for urgency and reaction. To continuously anchor yourself in the space between stimulus and response requires constant, deliberate effort. It demands that we become masters not just of action, but of consciousness itself. We must train ourselves moment by moment to pause, breathe, observe the thought passing through the mind as if it belonged to someone else, a neutral cloud passing across the vast blue sky of your awareness. This sustained attentiveness, this recognition of our own self-governance over our inner landscape, is the true blueprint for a life that feels genuinely solid and free. It is the realization that, while we cannot control the wind, we can absolutely adjust the sails of our spirit. We have traveled through complex territory, exploring the deceptive nature of control and the persistent whispers of our inner critic. We learned that freedom does not come from managing the world outside us, but from mastering the space within. The journey has taught us to view our thoughts not as immutable facts about reality, but merely as passing mental events, like clouds across a vast sky. This realization is profoundly liberating, yet it brings with it a new, perhaps more difficult challenge: the disciplined practice of acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood. People mistake it for resignation, or worse, apathy, a passive giving up. But in truth, profound acceptance is not simply accepting what we wish were untrue. It is recognizing reality exactly as it presents itself to us right now. It is a powerful observation. If thought is merely a passing ripple, what then does the magnitude of our life's journey become? We have traced this path through the landscape of inner discipline. We learned that freedom resides not in dictating external circumstances, the volatile tides of fortune, or the unpredictable actions of others, but within the quiet chambers of our own judgment. This understanding shifts everything. It means recognizing that the world itself is largely unmanageable, yet our reaction to it remains sacredly ours. Consider this. Every time we judge an event, we do not merely process information, we launch a subtle ripple into the pond of existence. That initial thought, the snap judgment, the preemptive anxiety, the whispered resentment, it possesses energy. It is never contained solely within us. It radiates outwards. This chapter asks us to view our thoughts through the lens of consequence. The mind is not a private theater. It is an energetic emitter. A single, unkind judgment about a colleague, for example, does not just hurt our internal peace. It introduces tension into a relationship that was otherwise stable. That small ripple expands, unseen until it meets another current, the recipient's mood, the workplace atmosphere, and finally, the broader pattern of misunderstanding. The cumulative effect is not merely personal suffering. It creates an environmental dissonance for everyone nearby. To understand this concept of the ripple effect is to assume profound responsibility. It means acknowledging that we are co-creators of our immediate reality. We cannot be blamed for the storm that gathers in the sky, nor can we control the winds that blow through others. But we are accountable for the small seeds we choose to plant within ourselves and around us. This concept demands a relentless cultivation of inner mindfulness. It requires seeing thought not as an instantaneous flash of ego-driven conclusion, but as a process, a gradual unfolding requiring observation at every stage. How many times have we been swept away by a wave of emotion, acting immediately based on the initial spike of feeling? We confuse that immediate reaction with profound insight or necessary truth. This is the danger zone. The mistake is to let one emotional ripple dictate the movement of an entire life chapter. Therefore, the most practical application of this wisdom involves building deliberate gaps, those pauses we previously identified as so vital. But now, these pauses are even more critical because they intervene between the originating thought and its outward physical or verbal manifestation. We must slow down until we can distinguish between a genuine observation of fact and an interpretive judgment layered upon that fact. An observation might be, "My friend is late." The judgment, however, is, "My friend disrespects me." These two states are fundamentally different, yet the gap between them is where our power to shape reality lies. Mastering this moment means pausing before responding defensively, pausing before speaking out of frustration, and most importantly, pausing before allowing one negative thought pattern, the rumination over past failures or anticipated future losses, to establish itself as an unbreakable truth about ourselves or others. The goal here is not simply achieving silence, which can feel isolating. It is about mastering the energy of our own interior dialogue, so that when we do speak or act, the outgoing ripple is one of clarity, intention, and minimal collateral damage. We must become conscientious architects of our internal life, understanding that every judgment casts a stone into the still pool of interpersonal connection. If the stones are crafted from frustration or superiority, the resulting ripples will undermine trust and create distance. But if we craft them from measured consideration, empathy, and objective observation, those ripples tend to smooth out, creating deeper connections and shared tranquility. The ripple effect thus transforms personal mental discipline into a powerful social ethics. It elevates self-control beyond mere emotional resilience. It makes it an act of communal care. When we manage the internal narrative, when we refuse to let bitterness or panic take root in our consciousness, we are not just healing ourselves. We are protecting the integrity of every person and relationship connected to us by that mental state. The journey culminates, then, in a profound re-examination of the original quote. It asks us to remember, always, to treat our minds not as an automatic broadcast system, but as a highly sensitive instrument requiring continuous calibration. Wisdom is simply this: the constant, compassionate effort to notice the genesis of a thought, to observe its arrival and departure without judgment, intervening only when that thought threatens to become destructive energy. It is the perpetual choice to let go of the unhelpful narrative pattern before it has time to gather enough momentum to reshape our immediate world. This continuous attention to the present moment, viewing thoughts as transient patterns rather than fixed truths, is the mastery we seek. It is the realization that by carefully managing our internal ripples, we gain control not only of ourselves, but contribute positively to the shared space of human experience. The lesson is profound. Nothing truly passes without leaving some trace. Therefore, let us strive for those traces to be beautiful, gentle, and constructive. We have spent this journey discussing control, detachment, and the quiet power of the internal life. We explored how much suffering stems not from the events that happen to us, but from our interpretations of those events, the story we tell ourselves about what is happening. Through these chapters, we learn to differentiate between what belongs to the world and what belongs solely to the self, the ability to observe, to judge, and finally, to choose. We practiced building that vital space between the stimulus and our initial reaction, slowing down those impulsive ripples of thought before they spread into action or harsh word. We realized that life is fundamentally messy. It is not a polished philosophical diagram, nor is it a perfect tragedy waiting for an elegant conclusion. Life simply happens, with all its uneven edges, unpredictable turns, and inevitable stumbles. The quest we began with was perhaps to find some ultimate, flawless state of being, a moment where every variable aligned perfectly, leaving us untouched by stress or disappointment. But philosophy teaches us something more grounded, something far more honest about the nature of struggle itself. True wisdom does not reside in pristine clarity or perfect execution. If we waited for those moments, we would wait forever. The pursuit of an idealized self is a trap, because perfection itself is an impossibility, both in human nature and in the flow of reality. The deepest philosophical breakthroughs are rarely found in immaculate moments. They flourish precisely in the uncomfortable space where our plans fail, where expectations collapse, and where we confront not flaws in the world, but the messy, imperfect nature of ourselves. This chapter is about accepting that struggle is part of the process itself. It is embracing the contradiction, knowing that to be profoundly human is to be fallible, inconsistent, and sometimes quite wrong. The great difficulty we have seen is the inherent resistance to imperfection. We spend so much energy trying to smooth out the wrinkles, to polish away the mistakes, to live up to some perfect internal mandate. This drive for flawlessness becomes a cage built of fear, the fear of judgment, the fear of failure, and the deep-seated belief that one is not worthy until every single variable is under control. Yet, life itself is inherently imperfect. Our bodies betray us with fatigue or illness. Our relationships bring unavoidable friction because two imperfect beings interact. The world operates in shades of gray, never in pure black and white, demanding that we abandon the soothing comfort of simplistic narratives. The ancient understanding suggests a radical shift here, that our virtue lies not in avoiding error, but in responding correctly to error. It is about recognizing the human condition for what it truly is, a beautiful, ongoing state of becoming, rather than a fixed, pristine, finished product. This means changing how we define strength. Strength is no longer merely self-control. It is also the capacity for tenderness toward our own failures. It is accepting that making mistakes is not evidence of moral failure, but simply proof that we are actively engaging with reality and trying to improve. The inner critic thrives on perfectionism because perfectionism offers a temporary illusion of control. If I can just fix this flaw, if I can just eliminate that bad habit, then I will finally be safe, finally worthy, finally enlightened. But safety is an illusion built upon an unstable foundation of constant striving toward an unreachable ideal. The path forward requires us to treat our imperfections not as blemishes to be erased, but as vital informational nodes, as raw material for growth. Each misstep becomes a lesson in humility. Each moment of weakness becomes a chance to practice compassion for the self that is still learning. This profound acceptance does not lead to apathy or carelessness. Far from it. It gives us an unexpected clarity of purpose. By releasing the immense, exhausting pressure of having to be perfect all the time, we find genuine energy for meaningful action. We reclaim our focus for what truly matters: acts of kindness, moments of presence, and responsible participation in a flawed world. We must learn to value the effort over the outcome. The intention behind the action holds more ethical weight than the perfection of the resulting product. The commitment to showing up, messy edges and all, is where true character is forged. Embracing imperfection means understanding that the self we are meant to be is not a statue carved from flawless marble, but something resilient, something deeply textured by struggle, a living landscape marked by peaks of clarity and valleys of doubt. And in those very textures, we find our most authentic power. We have journeyed through the profound territory of self-mastery. We learn to see external outcomes not as determinants of our happiness, but merely as raw material for practice. The deepest wisdom we sought was never a philosophy on a shelf or a single moment of perfect clarity. It is something that emerges in the difficult space between stimulus and response. Chapter 9 asks us how this deeply internalized calm translates into action. It asks, what does centeredness look like when faced with real conflict, unexpected challenge, or profound human frustration? To act from calmness is not to be emotionless. That would be a kind of numbness, a withdrawal from life's vital current. True composure, the sort inspired by ancient wisdom, is far more demanding. It is an active engagement with difficulty, tempered by radical self-awareness. It means that when chaos erupts around you, a heated argument, a sudden loss, or institutional unfairness, your first instinct does not run wild. Instead, it pauses. You do not react immediately out of fear, anger, or hurt. That internal space, the pause button moment we studied earlier, becomes your most valuable tool. Consider the nature of conflict itself. Conflict is a collision of deeply held interpretations, a clash between two people's personal narratives about what should be true. When things break down in conversation, it is rarely because of the words spoken. it is usually because of the judgment placed upon those words. We judge intentions, we label characters as deficient, and we immediately assign blame. This emotional quickening bypasses reason entirely. The disciplined action from calmness requires us to intercept that initial judgmental impulse. It asks us to view our own anger not as a sign of how deep the hurt is, but merely as an energy surge, a chemical reaction in the body, a powerful signal that needs careful observation before being translated into damaging speech or impulsive deed. We must ask ourselves, what story am I telling myself right now about this person, about this situation, and about my own need to be right? And often, the answers reveal a deeply uncomfortable truth. Our most ardent desire in conflict is not resolution itself, but validation of our internal narrative. We want others to acknowledge how wronged we are, or how correct we fundamentally are. This desperate need for external agreement blinds us and drives us into cycles of reactive defense. The journey towards acting from calmness, therefore, becomes an ethic of profound self-responsibility. It means understanding that before you open your mouth in disagreement, you must first perform a quiet internal audit. You must pause long enough to hear not just the shouts around you, but the quieter voice of objective reason within yourself. This is where we finally put our earlier concepts into full motion. We are taking the principle of detached judgment, which we saw as freeing us from suffering in solitude, and making it a social mechanism. Our inner freedom must become external reliability. If I can control my judgment even when attacked or provoked, then I offer something valuable to the environment around me: stability. I do not guarantee peace, but I ensure that my contribution to the moment is one of thoughtful deliberation, rather than uncontrolled impulse. Think of a master artisan at work. They are challenged by difficult materials, a stubborn piece of wood or uneven stone. They cannot wish the material into compliance, but they possess skill, developed through endless practice, and this skill allows them to move with purposeful gravity. Their actions are always tailored to the reality of the material before them. A person acting from calmness approaches a challenging relationship or situation similarly. The challenge, the conflict, the perceived wrong, is the resistant material. Our self-mastery is the skill set. We do not try to force the outcome. We deliberately structure our response so that it works with the immediate reality of the moment. This means embracing what Aristotle called phronses, or practical wisdom. It is not knowing all the answers, but knowing how to think when you do not know the answer. It is the ability to weigh competing values under pressure: my desire for justice versus my need for peace, my urge to be understood versus the necessity of restraint. The true paradox here, and perhaps the hardest hurdle, is accepting that sometimes genuine wisdom dictates saying nothing at all. That silence, which feels like withdrawal or defeat, is in fact the most potent act of power. It is a conscious decision to withhold reaction, thereby refusing to participate in the cycle of emotional escalation. The stillness itself becomes an assertion of internal sovereignty. The greatest test of character, it seems, is not enduring suffering alone in silence, but navigating complexity with grace and deliberate intent. Action from calmness is simply the practical application of knowing what is truly yours, your judgment and your choice, when everything around you feels volatile and outside of your control. It is the promise that even when we cannot change the storm, we will never surrender our interior harbor. We have spent time mapping the difficult terrain of the mind. We explored how often we are trapped not by external forces, but by our own attachments. Attachments to outcomes, attachments to people, and even deep attachments to how things should be. This craving for control, This insistence that life must conform to a certain script or expectation is perhaps the heaviest burden of all. It chains us far more securely than any visible restraint. The journey through self-mastery has been rigorous, requiring us to observe our judgments, pause before reaction, and embrace the necessary messiness of being human. The fundamental paradox we now approach is this. In a world that constantly demands effort to succeed, effort to control emotions, effort to prove oneself right, where does genuine freedom reside? The answer lies in detachment. Detachment, often misunderstood, is frequently equated with coldness or indifference. We imagine it as a profound withdrawal from life, a turning away from care and connection. But true philosophical detachment is not emotional absence. It is an intellectual realization about the nature of attachment itself. It begins when we cease to treat things, be they achievements, relationships, or even our own current state of mind, as absolute goods that must be permanently held onto. We recognize them instead as momentary processes, temporary phenomena. When we understand something's transient nature, its hold on us loosens. This is not giving up. It is recognizing the fundamental law of change itself. It is realizing that everything arrives and every single thing departs. The struggle to let go often feels agonizingly difficult. We are wired for survival through connection and permanence. Losing something, or more profoundly, losing the idea that we can maintain things perfectly, triggers deep internal alarm bells. The mind rebels against this fluidity, preferring the illusion of solidity. The solid foundation of this is how it must be. This resistance generates suffering, because the pain is not from the loss itself, but from the desperate struggle to prevent the impermanence. The art of letting go, therefore, is the subtle practice of redefining ownership. We learn to differentiate between what we are responsible for, our internal view, our choice, our present attention, and what belongs entirely outside our sphere of influence. The wind is outside our control. The other person's decision is outside our control. The past moment is gone and cannot be salvaged or held onto. When we practice this intellectual detachment, something profound happens to our emotions. The things we once believed were source points for grief, the failure, the rejection, the missed opportunity, suddenly appear less powerful. They cease being catastrophic events and become simply information about reality. We are liberated from needing specific outcomes to define our worth or our peace. Our value becomes intrinsic, divorced from the fluctuating tides of external reward or criticism. Consider attachment to identity. Many people tie their sense of self-worth to titles, possessions, or even relationships that demand constant nurturing to survive. When these pillars shift, they feel like personal ruin. But through detachment, we understand that our essential self is not made of those things. It is a core consciousness, an observer, that remains fundamentally untouched by the loss of form, status, or companionship. This continuous process of releasing attachments requires courage. It means confronting our deepest desires and acknowledging that sometimes the best action for our own well-being is to simply allow something to pass. To let the thought drift away, unengaged in debate. To accept the current state of things without needing an immediate fix or dramatic change. The paradox lies in this. By practicing a profound non-attachment, a willingness not to cling, and not even to resist what is happening right now, we do not end up empty. We find that space filled with genuine freedom. It is the spaciousness between thoughts. It is the quiet clarity that arrives when the desperate holding on finally ceases. This deep well of detachment allows us to approach life not as a series of things we must fight for, but as an unfolding experience we are simply privileged to witness. It transforms suffering from something we try desperately to avoid into something neutral, a piece of passing weather that requires only mindful observation. Mastery is therefore not about building higher walls around what we value. It is about recognizing how porous all structures, and even ourselves, fundamentally are. The wisdom gleaned through this practice suggests that the highest form of engagement is precisely non-engagement. To be fully present, truly observant, yet unattached to the result of that observation. This becomes the ultimate blueprint for living a resilient, deeply peaceful life. We have journeyed a long way. We began with that single ancient quote, presented simply and without context, a phrase that felt heavy, almost like a physical weight upon the air. For weeks, we treated it as an enigma, something to be solved or defined. But wisdom, true philosophical understanding, resists simple definition. It is not a destination you arrive at. It is a posture of the mind, a continuous way of being. Think back to where we started. We spoke about the seductive illusion of control. We wrestled with the impulse to manage every single outcome in our lives, the health of others, the stability of economies, the actions of those we love. It feels natural to try and govern everything around us, does it not? To feel that if we just plan harder or care enough, nothing bad can happen. The subsequent chapters were a dismantling of this illusion. We found that much of what causes us suffering is not the event itself, but our judgment about that event. It is the narrative we build around reality. The "this cannot happen to me" or the "they shouldn't have done that." That creates the emotional pain. This realization was profound and freeing. Then came the fight with the inner critic. We confronted that relentless, judgmental voice within us. We learned that this critic thrives on making possibilities into certainties, on taking fleeting thoughts and treating them as immutable facts about who we are or what the world requires of us. The goal here was detachment, not apathy. It was the radical act of standing back and observing, recognizing a thought for what it is, just mental data passing through consciousness. The centerpiece became the space between stimulus and response, that pause button moment. We practiced slowing down time when confronted by frustration or anger. This taught us that self-mastery is not about never feeling emotion. It is about acknowledging the raw, chaotic energy of feeling while refusing to let it dictate our action. It is finding the internal gap necessary for deliberate choice. And then we faced acceptance. Acceptance is perhaps the most counterintuitive concept for the modern mind. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to fight the status quo, to push back against what is difficult or unjust. To hear the word acceptance and think immediately of resignation, of surrender. But we refined this understanding. True acceptance is not giving up. It is seeing reality sharply and honestly, acknowledging the way things are right now, flaws and all. It is a powerful observation, a moment of crystal clarity that holds no judgment. We saw how internal judgments ripple outward. Our private anxieties do not stay contained within us. They affect our speech, our relationships, and the atmosphere we share with others. This introduced a deep ethical weight to our individual minds. To achieve inner peace was found only to be accountable for making that peace visible in our interactions with the world. We studied letting go. We examined attachment to success, to people, to comfort. The insight was simple but difficult. Clinging is itself a form of suffering. True freedom comes when we recognize transience, when we understand that nothing remains permanent, and therefore, our resistance to what changes loses its necessary force. All these lessons, the pause button, the objective observer, disciplined acceptance, emotional non-attachment, they were not random philosophical exercises. They are threads leading back to the very core of that original ancient quote. When we re-examine it now, through this lens of lived practice, the words no longer feel cryptic or academic. They sound like a practical blueprint for human existence. The quote is not merely offering advice. It is describing an internal process, a mechanism for achieving profound psychological resilience. It demands that we become meticulous guardians of our own attention and judgment. If we understand this, the weight lifts. We stop trying to control the chaotic outcomes handed to us by fate or circumstance. Instead, we focus on the small, constant act required, maintaining awareness. Attention becomes our greatest muscle. This is the commitment to continually ask ourselves what part of the quote applies to the space between now and the moment immediately after it. It means recognizing that our deepest conflicts rarely arise from powerful external forces assaulting us. They often begin with a small, automatic internal judgment, a flash of resentment, a quick assumption, a momentary despair. And those are the moments we must intercept. The philosophical challenge is to train ourselves to notice that tiny whisper of judgment before it gains momentum, to observe the initial ripple as it forms in our minds. The ultimate wisdom derived from this synthesis is that mastery is always immediate. It requires zero procrastination. We cannot afford to say, "I will be less stressed next month," or "I will master my patience when I retire." No, the time for practice is now. Today, in the space before we speak, in the pause before we react to a disagreement, in the moment we allow ourselves to simply observe a thought without agreeing with it, that is where the entire philosophy lies. The journey from merely knowing this theory to living by it requires constant vigilance. It means treating attention not as an optional state of mind, but as a fundamental survival skill. Because until we are fully present, and until we have subjected our internal dialogue to objective review, we remain slaves to the narrative, slaves to expectation, to regret, and to fear. And in that servitude, no amount of external success or control can ever truly grant us freedom. Wisdom is simply showing up for yourself, exactly as you are, moment by precious moment. We have walked a long and challenging path through the landscape of philosophy. We started by examining the deceptive allure of control, realizing that so much of our daily anxiety stems from attempts to manage things which fundamentally belong to fortune or to other people's wills. Chapter 2 taught us that freedom is not about changing external circumstances, but about mastering the internal space, the space between stimulus and your reaction. This principle became clearer as we confronted the insidious presence of the inner critic. We learned that our suffering rarely originates from a genuinely bad event. Rather, it comes from our immediate, unexamined judgment about that event. The very act of labeling an experience as bad or defining another person's action as wrong is where the initial ripple of trouble begins. To achieve peace, we had to learn how to step back and become mere observers of our own mental processes. This required treating critical thoughts not as immutable truths about ourselves or the world, but simply as passing data points, mental whispers that must be heard, acknowledged, and then allowed to fade away without engagement. We began practicing the pause button moment. It is nothing grand. It is merely a breath held for an extra second. That tiny space provides enough distance to ask, is this thought fact? Or is this simply history repeating itself in my mind? This discipline of self-observation led us naturally to define what truly belongs within our sphere of influence. We were guided to understand that while we cannot control external outcomes, we retain absolute sovereignty over our judgments and our intentions. These are the two foundational pillars of a life well lived. Our practice moved from theory into action, realizing that acceptance is not passive resignation. It is an active choice to see reality precisely as it appears before us right now, without layering upon it the disappointment of how we wished it were. This conscious observation became our most powerful tool. We discovered the profound ripple effect of thought. Every judgmental impulse we allow to pass unchallenged radiates outward, affecting those around us and staining the shared environment of a community. Therefore, self-mastery quickly became an ethical responsibility, a way to care for others by first mastering ourselves. This deep sense of personal accountability propelled us toward acknowledging that wisdom is inherently messy. It does not reside in the flawless execution of a grand plan or in a single perfect moment of clarity. Instead, true strength emerged from embracing imperfection and treating failure not as an indictment of our worth, but as necessary material, the raw clay for the next attempt at growth. We learn to engage with conflict not through emotional reaction, but through considered composure. This required pausing the initial surge of anger or defense, viewing such strong emotions merely as transient energy spikes that demand a thoughtful audit before any word is spoken. Such deliberate response elevates self-control into external reliability, giving us the capacity for profound practical wisdom in the face of immediate difficulty. Then we tackled the difficult paradox: detachment. We wrestled with the idea that to truly be free, we must detach ourselves from outcomes, from the desire for people to love us, or for a specific result to materialize. This meant accepting transience and acknowledging that clinging is the root source of all suffering. The breakthrough realization was that non-attachment does not mean emotional emptiness. It means recognizing value in the journey itself, regardless of its final destination. All these threads, the mastery of judgment, the practice of acceptance, the restraint in action, and the power of detachment, converged upon us when we returned to the ancient quote. Initially, it felt like a cryptic philosophical puzzle. Now, having filtered it through this entire rigorous process of self-examination, its meaning has become remarkably clear. It is not a pronouncement to be memorized or admired. It is an immediate and continuous blueprint for being. The wisdom encapsulated in those ancient words requires nothing less than vigilant, undivided attention to the present moment. We must integrate these principles into the fabric of our daily existence until they become automatic. The way we breathe, the way we speak, the way we pause before reacting. Building a life of wisdom is therefore not an achievement. It is a relentless dedication to mindfulness. It is built moment by moment, decision by decision, thought by conscious thought. It demands that we treat every day as a renewed practice in profound self-restraint and radical acceptance. We must continually train ourselves to intercept the judgment before it solidifies into feeling, emotion, or action. The challenge remains, maintaining this vigilance when life becomes loud, complex, or painful. This is where the daily routine of intentional effort takes over. Wisdom does not require grand revelations. It requires persistent habits. It means carving out small spaces each day, the mindful walk, the reflective silence, the committed moment of journaling, a difficult feeling, rather than simply acting on it. These small acts accumulate, slowly but surely, transforming abstract philosophical concepts into tangible character traits. The goal is to arrive at a state where our inner landscape no longer shifts violently with external stimuli. We want that inner calm to become so robust that it influences the outside world positively. When we build this internal citadel of awareness, we naturally improve our relationships, enhance our professional conduct, and deepen our compassion for others who are struggling with their own judgments. Ultimately, the philosophy is simple. Everything that happens right now is all there is. Our power lies only in how we choose to witness it. The final task, then, is not merely understanding these concepts, but embodying them completely. It means viewing this very moment, the air entering your lungs, the specific feeling of reading these words, the passage of time itself, as the primary subject of your attention. To be present is to practice freedom. It is the most active, powerful form of philosophical engagement we possess. And only through that unwavering focus can a life truly become wise. We have walked through demanding philosophical terrain. We started by questioning our instinctive desire to control every outcome, believing that the world should bend to our will or judgment. We spent time identifying the deception at the heart of this struggle, the relentless attempt to manage what is fundamentally outside of our personal domain. The choices of others, the whims of fortune, or the sheer randomness of external events. Through this process, we learned a fundamental truth that shifts all perspectives. True liberty is not found in omnipotence over the world, but in absolute mastery over the inner landscape. It means recognizing where your true power resides. It rests solely within the space between feeling and acting, that crucial pause. The breath you take before responding to criticism, the moment of silence before making a decisive promise. That pause is not merely an interval of time, it is a sacred, actionable pocket of self-possession. For too long, we have allowed our inner narrative, our judgment about what happened, who said what, or what might happen next, to dictate the quality of our moment. We treated these judgments as bedrock facts, believing that if they were true in our minds, they must be true in reality itself. This assumption is perhaps the most profound source of human suffering. It leads us to perpetual disappointment because we are constantly erecting expectations about how life ought to operate, only to meet the chaotic indifference of reality. Our inner critic thrives in this fertile soil of expectation. It whispers that failure proves inadequacy, that hardship confirms our worthlessness, that peace is unattainable unless we fix circumstances immediately. We treat these negative thoughts as commands or as inevitable truths that require immediate emotional surrender and dramatic reaction. Yet, as we have seen, a thought itself holds no inherent force. It is merely energy passing through the mind's theater. To find liberation, we must practice an incredible objective distance, to become observers of our own minds. We learn to name these judgments. That was a fear thought, or that was an assumption about the future. By naming them, we strip them of their authority. They cease being defining parts of who we are and become what they truly are, temporary mental data points. This shift is perhaps the hardest intellectual leap to make, because it asks us to dismantle our deepest habits of self-identification. We must unlearn the habit of reacting instantly with emotional force, building instead a deliberate space, the pause button moment. But this control extends far beyond just managing thoughts. It demands that we confront what lies within our physical and social boundaries. Where does your personal responsibility begin, and where does the world's messy reality end? We must draw that line with care, recognizing that self-care is not a luxury. It is an active philosophical imperative. Without respecting our inner limits, we become vulnerable to external demands and the inevitable disappointments of connection. When we fail to honor this boundary, whether by overextending ourselves or by allowing emotional intrusions, we generate negative ripples that expand outward, touching relationships, reputations, and internal tranquility alike. These ripples prove that the mind is never truly isolated. Our inner turmoil inevitably colors the environment around us. Thus, the ancients guide us toward a profound responsibility, understanding that every judgment we utter, every decision we make, creates an energetic consequence for others. Our actions, even those of inaction or prolonged silence, are statements about our values and how much we care for the shared space. This sense of ripple effect elevates self-control from a personal virtue into a social ethic, a commitment to mindful living that sustains both ourselves and our communities. We began by looking at ourselves in isolation, but wisdom, as we realize, is inherently relational. It demands that our internal peace must contribute something positive, measurable, to the world around us. This brings us back to the core question of true acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood. People confuse it with paralysis or simply giving up when things become difficult. But genuine philosophical acceptance is not passive resignation. It is an active observation of reality as it is in this very instant, without wishing it were otherwise. When we genuinely accept a challenging circumstance, be it loss, conflict, or profound discomfort, we are engaging in one of the most powerful acts of internal mastery. We stop expending energy fighting what already exists. We redirect that massive reservoir of mental energy towards deciding how we will respond to this reality right now. This is where detachment meets resilience. Detachment is not emotional absence. It means releasing our desperate grip on outcomes. The belief that if X happens, then we must feel Y way, or Z outcome must occur for us to be happy. By loosening that attachment to potential futures and past grievances, we find intrinsic freedom. We understand that while we cannot control the wave that hits the shore, we have absolute command over whether we choose to fight it or flow with it. This ability to flow requires a constant state of vigilance, a continuous readiness to apply our understanding. Wisdom is not a monumental breakthrough achieved in one perfect moment. It is the sustained quality of your attention in every single passing second. It is the daily, mundane choice to observe without judgment, to pause before reacting, and to assume full ownership of your inner world, while simultaneously recognizing the ripple effect you have on others. This profound commitment to self-mastery guides us toward a deliberate mode of existence, the life built upon consistent, mindful effort. We must view every day not as a sequence of events that happen to us, but as an active collection of choices we are making with our attention. To live wisely is to be acutely present for the challenge, fully aware of our own judgments, and perpetually choosing compassion, regardless of how difficult the external world makes the process. It is a call back to this very moment, demanding that we awaken to the richness and the responsibility inherent in simply existing here. There are no grand philosophical secrets waiting at the end of the journey, only the discipline of turning one's attention toward the present self. That focused presence, that acceptance coupled with active choice, is the ultimate